Thank you, Sam, for being here today. Appreciate it. My question is, and I'm going to phrase it a certain way on purpose. Who is in charge of your covenants in the church?
Hmm. I'm going to go with the individual who makes the covenants with God.
Okay, why so?
They are because at the end of the day, when I enter into the baptismal covenant, I'm not entering in the baptismal covenant with the person who raises their right hand and says the ordinance or performs the ordinance. I'm actually making the covenant with God. And I think you see this, and we could talk about scenarios specifically if you want, because I have one ready to go locked and loaded. Okay, so I'm thinking sealing ordinances.
Okay.
So I'm preparing a talk for this Sunday about eternal families. And so I've been going through like the Adam and Eve typology, right? And kind of like going through each of those and looking at the sealing ordinance and whatnot. And when I look at it, the covenant itself is actually made between you and God, and it's witnessed by the other person on the other side of the altar that you're getting sealed to, as well as the individuals that are in the room, the witnesses. And it's interesting because oftentimes when you think of like being married, it's very, well, this person's not doing this thing, or this person is annoying me in this fashion. Therefore, I can break it off with that person to find a person who is more compatible with me.
Okay.
But in reality, here's how I kind of view it. And once again, this is just based off my own perspective. And I will say I am not sealed in the temple to my wife. So I just want to put that out there.
So your opinion's totally invalid. That's what you're saying?
It's totally, yeah. Yeah. But yeah, but here's how I view it. I have an obligation to keep that covenant to God. And that's the covenant. That's who I've made the covenant with. I've made the covenant with God to do this certain amount of things and to act this certain way and to treat this person a certain way with God, not with the other person. Now, the other person has witnessed that I have entered into that covenant with God, and therefore is there to keep me, accountable. But at the end of the day, it's my covenant with God that I'm honoring. And so just because that person disappoints me, and a good way to look at it is like, how often has Israel disappointed God, and God hasn't been like, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and find another people, like over here. So like, well, granted, I think at one point God does give Israel her papers of divorcement.
Yeah.
But I mean, it didn't last for long, right? He still pursued her. He still pursued her, right? And so that's how I look at it with all covenants.
Okay. So then another leading question in that vein, who gets to determine whether or not you are keeping your covenants?
And once again, I mean, we have the when it comes to worthiness to enter into the Lord's house, we have a checklist of sorts. But I think the idea, and once again, this is my personal opinion, I think the idea behind the checklist is more so for the individual to determine whether or not they're meeting that criteria. And the reason why I say that is it really is based off the individual's understanding of the covenants they've made. And so I think what's beautiful about making additional covenants and keeping them is that as you're given the further light and knowledge, you actually do kind of begin to have deeper understanding of things. One of those things is, for me personally, the word of wisdom, right? So I have a monster drink here. Mm. For some, right? So for me, I am struggling, but I am striving. I'm struggling to keep this portion of the word of wisdom. Now, people might say, Sam, that's not a part of the word of wisdom. But in my current understanding, how I interpret the word of wisdom, I'm looking at the principles, and I have a hard time focusing without this. I have a hard time being myself without this. And so I need to incorporate this into my word of wisdom that I'm keeping. But that doesn't mean that the other person sitting in the pew next to me necessarily needs to. And so once again,
what you're saying is that you're working through the problems in life and trying to figure out what all this means and how to do it all. And part of that is understanding whether or not you feel worthy to consider yourself a covenant keeper. And we've been given some guidelines here and there, whether it's questions or a checklist or a person, to help us understand whether or not we're on the path, this covenant path. Is that
Yeah.
okay?
And that's why President Nelson's talk about thinking celestial is so important, because if I'm looking with the end in mind, what do I want to become? Okay, well, working back from there, I've made these covenants. Now, what is it about these covenants? And that's why I like talking about covenants a lot. It's like, what about these covenants are actually making me like Jesus Christ or like Heavenly Father? How is it transforming me? And then how can I get the most out of these covenants? And so that's just how I view it. But
I like that. So I want to propose a challenging situation to see what you think. So a person in the church, let's say they're loosely active, they're participating here and there, and then they make what is perceived to be a mistake or a sin of some kind. And you can find examples of this in church history and even modern day. And they get called in and basically are told that they're going to have a disciplinary council of some kind, that the bishop wants to talk to them, stake president, what's going on. And in the process, the church, which is the church officials, bishop, stake president, whoever, determines that they are not going to be allowed to participate in the church. They're going to receive some kind of disciplinary action, maybe a disfellowship, maybe an excommunication, maybe they're going to get their name removed, et cetera, et cetera. In this process, the church is, the way some people would think about it, is telling this person, you are not keeping your covenants, and therefore we're going to discipline you. So in that case, who's deciding if they're keeping their covenants or not?
yeah, so I think the scenarios in which that would actually occur are pretty dire. They're pretty. There's certain circumstances that, like in the case of unaliving your preborn child. I don't know, like what you can see on YouTube.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Getting copy strikes. Yeah, or other things with females that they don't want. There's certain scenarios in which a action needs to be taken by the church, because the situations are more cut and dry, and so like, but even then, right? So even when councils are called up and people are brought forward before the tribunal,
yeah,
that's not actually what it's called,
yeah.
but some might think of it like that. It really is out of a labor of love, right? And it's for the benefit of the individual. Now, that being said, I've personally never been to one. And so I'm only hoping that if I was ever in the situation where I'm either, well, I never hope I'm in the situation where I'm needing to go to one of those. But
yeah.
The situation where I need to participate in one, I mean, it's going to be something that you're like prayerfully, like you're praying about it. You're probably going to be fasting a lot, right? Because these things aren't done on a whim. It's like, these things are a little bit in advance. I've heard of them happening. I've just never been to one.
Yeah.
And so,
I've not participated in one, though. I've heard half a dozen stories. Several of them are people that are close to me in family, and I've even helped rebaptize some of these people who have been through this situation. And so I think it happens enough that people think about it. I don't think, the intent isn't to help somebody who's going through this, because that would be really hard. And if that is the case, good luck to you. But a lot of people think about this because you hear a story. You hear the story where something happened. If you listen to the Comeback podcast, you would have heard dozens of these types of stories. This comes up quite a lot because they specialize in these stories.
Good channel.
Yeah, great. Love them. So they get some kind of a disciplinary action, and most of the time it seems like the members are just out of touch enough that they don't really understand what's going on, and then they're relieved of their covenants. Effectively, they're excommunicated, and they're surprised. They're in shock because they thought they were covenant keepers. They thought they were following Christ. They thought they were doing okay. They just weren't going to church or whatever. They were kind of lost in the wind. And so now they're being told, oh, you're going to hell, to put it in Protestant terms, is now you've been exiled from the celestial kingdom. And that's what I think is not true, not helpful, and can be very damaging if you don't understand the nature of a covenant. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, so I would hope in that scenario, if they truly were unaware, that it wouldn't end like that. And so my understanding of disfellowship or excommunication and those processes is typically when it happens, it's usually somebody who knows what they're doing is incorrect. And I think you'd be hard pressed, and you have to call me out on this, but I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who's just been baptized that's been excommunicated.
Yeah, that happened to one of my converts actually in my mission, but it is very rare. I could actually send you a couple.
It's very rare.
I could send you a couple of podcasts from the Come Follow Me to kind of like illustrate exactly, not Come Follow Me, Come Back podcast, to illustrate exactly kind of like the people that I'm thinking about. But I think I'll say, kind of my thesis on the topic, and you can tell me what you think. So when you make a covenant with God, like you said, you are making the covenant with God. And you can break the covenant. God could, but he's not going to break the covenant. So really the only person in that covenant relationship that can break the covenant is you. The church cannot break the covenant. And so they can come to you and they can say, you're out. Excommunicated, name off the record, priesthood removed, blessings revoked, you're gone. And the church has authority to do that within the church's authority. But the church is not God. And so God can still honor whatever covenants he wants to honor. And you can still honor the covenants that you've made. And so in effect, you could literally be ripped out of the church and still consider yourself, if you'd like to, a covenant keeper. Now, you can't consider yourself, temple worthy, because the temples and that process lie within the church that you are now not a part of, and you'd have to work to get back to that position. But the covenant is not something that the church owns or possesses or has the right to control within your life. And the way I like to think about it is that the church is the steward of the covenant, so they take care of that process. It's kind of like their child that they're trying to nurture and help and help other people enjoy the same kind of covenant. But they're not capable of telling people whether or not they're keeping the covenant outside of helping them understand how to determine that for themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what I would hope.
And I think that's the key part at the end, for sure.
And to me, it seems obvious, but I've also spent quite a bit of time thinking about it, and I know that there are people out there. I have several new members in the ward, and we've got 10 new members in the ward or so just in the past year, and there's some basic concepts that they still are have some questions around. Just last week we had this whole Godhead Trinity conversation, and they were like, "Oh yeah, that does make sense." Yeah, like I never thought about it, but if you believe that Joseph Smith had the first vision the way he said he did, then you can't really believe in the Trinity. We're like, yeah, no, that's exactly right. It doesn't really work. So this is one of those things, I think, where if you understand the nature of a covenant, it makes it easier to own it outside of all of the weird administration things that can be confusing.
Yeah, I think it's good as members to learn quickly that there's a difference between policy and covenants you've made. And even within covenants you've made, like what I've seen, and this perhaps is something we could talk about in the future, like the exact wording of an ordinance, like if that changes with the understanding that like the covenant is something, the ordinance is something, and the actions within the ordinance are something, right? The actions are different than the ordinance. It's a part of it, the words, and the words are a part of the covenant. So it's like, it's multi-layered, and the covenant never changes. The promise never changes, but the wording can change. The actions can change. Now, granted, baptism has been, kind of this consistent for quite a bit of time, but Baptism for me, so the way I understand it, baptism tomorrow could change completely. Like the wording can change and the actions can change. But as long as there's something that's being done that represents that covenant symbolically, I'm perfectly fine with it. Because I'm just trying to make that agreement with God. That's it. I'm trying to make as many as he'll allow me to make.
Yeah.
If he gives me more agreements, more covenants to make with him, I'll make them.
Yeah.
Because I know, based off the covenants I made, how much extra light I get.
Yes.
So
that's a very good way to put it. We should do another talk about that specifically because I've heard that mentioned. Like, usually it's an older generation that will say something like, "Oh, now that they've changed the wording in the endowment, is it still the same covenant? And like, is it now a different covenant? Does it mean more or less than what I was doing when I was a kid?" And in my mind, that's such a weird way to think about it. It doesn't.
I know.
Because in my mind, and this is something that I came across years ago, is when I see the ancients going through a covenant process, it looks way different than what I'm doing. So Moses, Abraham, Elijah, even
Adam.
So they're doing it way different. And in my mind, it's the exact same thing. And then some people, they look at that and they're like, "Oh, no, it's a different covenant because now it's new and everlasting. So it's supposed to look completely different." And I'm like, no, it's the exact same thing. It's like
the end goal is the same.
Yeah, and the reasoning, the whys, what it's doing for us is all the same. To close out, there's a video lecture series by Hugh Nibley. Some of his first lecture series. Have you seen any of those? They're like really long and boring.
No, but I love Hugh Nibley.
Yeah.
So
he's great.
Where is it at? Is it on Rough Stone Rolling?
No, it's on YouTube under like Hugh Nibley lectures or something like that.
Oh, okay, cool.
And the one that I'm thinking of is specifically on the Pearl of Great Price. And he
okay.
So he brings so they're literally him recording lectures, him giving to his BYU classes. And he brings out a book that at the time was known to be the oldest book known to the human race. It was like 10,000 years old. And he's an expert in ancient languages. And so he reads this ancient language. He's like piecing it together on the prompter in front of his class. Like,
some Semitic language.
Yeah, speaking some gibberish and nobody understands.
Yeah.
And he's interpreting it. And it is the Adam and Eve story. It's the Adam and Eve endowment. But it sounds and looks a lot different. And then he basically goes through it and says, yeah, this is exactly what we do. And I saw that years ago, and I was like, yes, this makes perfect sense. Like, it would look different, but it's actually the exact same thing. And so I see that in a lot of different places, and it helps reaffirm in my mind that this covenant thing that we're doing is an individual experience where God's reaching out to us and we are responding. And the church is here to help facilitate that relationship, not dictate that relationship.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts?
Well, you see it with the what's the name of the book for the youth now?
For the Strength of the Youth, that one?
For the Strength of Youth, right? Like, and President Nelson has done a really good job of like kind of peeling back some of these really specific applications and kind of leaving it at principles. Because at the end of the day, and this is, once again, I want to reiterate, this is something I've been learning a lot since I've been coming back to the church, is restructuring my mind so that when I look at Scott, I don't say, hey, why doesn't Scott understand it the way I understand it? Right? What is it about Scott that he just doesn't understand? When in reality, Scott could either be, if this is the covenant path and this is the goal, right? This is weird because this is my left side, so this is actually the end or the beginning. But if this is the end, I might be here, but Scott might be here. He might be ahead of me. And so he might have a completely different understanding than I do. And so we just need to continue to study, do our self-study, our prayer, live our covenants, and then we'll be given that further light and knowledge as time goes on. And we need to apply what we know. And as we do that, there will be times when perhaps the church structure it's not infallible, right? There's still fallible human beings that are running the church at all levels. They're trying their best, but at times they're going to make mistakes. But just understanding that we're here to make covenants, we're here to walk by faith, we're here to receive a body. The end goal is what the end goal is. We're trying to be just like Jesus Christ. So how can I get there? The church, you need the church for that. You absolutely need the church for that. You can't go solo. You can't go flying solo.
Yeah.
You can't go turbo. You can't. You're not going turbo on
Yeah,
me.
yeah, that's right.
Wreck it out.
You can do it without the church, but you won't get very far. It's like trying to cross the savannah without a tour guide. Like, is it possible? Yeah, I guess, maybe. But if you have a tour guide, it's much more enjoyable. You'll get much further. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Well,
awesome.
Thanks, Sam. Crushing it through the mist. Go watch it. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you.